6 years after a zombie apocalypse that had erased most of humanity, 2 children, a brother and sister, had survived inside their secluded villa. Until one day, a pickup truck pulled up outside. Jim, the older brother, met them at the door holding his toy gun. The man immediately asked about his parents, but when Jim refused to answer, the stranger smirked knowingly and replied, "See you next time." That night, Jim made sure every door and window was sealed shut. A few zombies prowled in the darkness, waiting for a chance to attack, but by dawn, the villa remained untouched. When Jim checked his weapon, it became clear that his so-called toy gun wasn't ordinary at all. The next day, as the siblings played outside, the same truck returned. Again, they demanded to know where the children's parents were. Jim lied, saying they had gone to town for supplies, but the woman smiled knowingly, pointing out that the nearest town was hours away. She reassured them and promised that she and her husband would stay and protect them until their parents returned. Once inside, the couple quickly noticed the villa's stocked pantry and even a working refrigerator, rare luxuries in this ruined world. That night, Jim overheard them whispering about how perfect the villa was. For safety, Jim quietly led his sister into their hidden safe room, the secret refuge that had ensured their survival all these years. By morning, Jack was in the kitchen, making breakfast as though he already owned the place. Jim stayed calm, but suddenly said something in a strange tone.
"It will be over before you know it."
When night fell, Jim instantly scooped up his sister and locked her securely inside the safe room. Downstairs, the couple was still going about their evening, unaware that danger was closing in. The woman excused herself to use the bathroom, but when she peeked through the window, she saw several zombies at the window. She switched off the light, hoping to vanish into the shadows, but before she could move, the door behind her creaked open. Moments later, Jack heard her scream. He drew his gun and rushed over, only to find her lying in a pool of blood. That was the last time the couple had been seen. Elsewhere in the snowy forest, a man was moving cautiously when he noticed a line of traps buried in the snow and followed them straight back to the villa. Suddenly, the little girl appeared in front of him, but before he could react, a dart stung his neck. Jim had struck him with the tranquilizer. When the man woke up, Jim stood over him with his gun. After questioning him, the stranger introduced himself as Dan, a former Special Forces soldier searching for his wife up north. Unlike others, he wasn't after their supplies or medicine. All he wanted was his weapon back. Jim saw a chance to make a deal. In exchange for the weapon, Dan would help power the villa. Dan asked about their parents, and this time, Jim told the truth. His father was a scientist and had gone missing long ago. His mother, a trained security agent, had left on a mission recently and was expected to return soon. Dan was stunned when he discovered the source of the villa's electricity, a treadmill powered by someone physically running on it. Just then, a zombie appeared outside the window. Dan rushed out to kill it and returned covered in blood. Jim scolded him angrily. "Why did you kill it? The windows are bulletproof. No zombie can get in." Despite the harsh words, Dan climbed onto the treadmill himself and ran until he was exhausted and went to take a shower. Later, while exploring the villa, a hidden room in the corner caught his eye, but just as he moved to investigate, Jim stopped him sharply. After spending a full day together, the siblings seemed convinced Dan wasn't a threat. That night, they didn't hide in the safe room, but strangely, Jim handcuffed himself before bed. The next day, Dan forced open the locked room he hadn't been allowed into earlier and found only a blanket on the ground and walls covered in deep scratch marks. It was a cell, a place for holding zombies captive. The discovery only deepened his suspicions about the children's true story. Out of nowhere, the roar of an engine broke the silence outside the villa. A group of armed survivors had arrived and circled the house with guns drawn, eyes scanning every shadow for movement. Things got worse in an instant. While Jim's sister had been playing outdoors, they had captured her. But just then, gunfire rang out from the shadows and 2 raiders dropped instantly. Dan seized the moment, charged forward and pulled the little girl free. The one who had fired those life-saving shots was none other than Jim's mother, Melanie. But amid the chaos, one of the surviving raiders fired, and the bullet slammed into Dan's chest, knocking him unconscious. Surprisingly, when Dan finally opened his eyes, his wound was completely healed. Still dazed, Dan entered the villa, where Melanie told him the truth. Normal infected lose their brain functions and live only to feed. But there is another special kind of infected who retain their human intelligence, but with all the advantages of the virus, including rapid healing and immunity to sickness. But the gift came with a curse. Severe injury or time itself would eventually push them into a savage frenzy, where they became indistinguishable from ordinary zombies. Dan realized he was one of them, and Melanie confirmed it. Otherwise, he would never have survived a gunshot. Melanie also confessed that her son Jim was also a special infected, just like him. The night that couple was killed, it was Jim who had lost control during one of his frenzies. That's why he always handcuffs himself before bed, to make sure his sister would never get hurt when the madness overtakes him. Later, in a quiet conversation, Melanie revealed the rest of her family's tragedy. Both Jim and his sister had been born with congenital heart defects. Their father, who was a brilliant biologist, had been the first to uncover the existence of the zombie virus. When he realized his son would not live beyond the age of 3, he injected Jim with the zombie virus, turning him into a special infected. But when Jim entered his frenzy for the very first time, he bit his father. Unlike Jim, the man was not immune and slowly turned into a mindless zombie, forcing Melanie to kill her own husband. As the days passed, Melanie and her children began to lean on Dan more and more, trusting him, relying on him, even seeing him as part of their family. One day, without any warning, Jim's frenzy was about to happen. He rushed into the secret room, locked the door, and within seconds, horrifying screams and frantic pounding echoed from inside. Melanie stood outside, her heart breaking with every cry, but all she could do was wait for the storm to pass. Dan quietly stepped in, insisting on taking the watch in her place. Days passed in this painful routine until tragedy struck again. While playing near the outdoor traps, Jim's sister suddenly collapsed. Her heart condition had returned. With no access to advanced medicine, Dan suggested turning her into a special infected like Jim by injecting the virus. But Melanie refused outright. She would not take that risk with her daughter. In the end, they chose to let the little girl pass away peacefully. When Jim emerged from his frenzy and learned the truth, grief washed over the family. Together, they gathered around her lifeless body and said their final goodbyes. Eventually, the time came for Dan to leave. Though Melanie and Jim pleaded with him to stay, he remained firm, saying he had to continue searching for his wife. Now, with the girl gone and Dan departed, the villa felt emptier and colder than ever before. That same night, a group of armed men arrived at the villa. Their leader was a man who was searching desperately for his daughter, who had run off with a young man, and he had brought his men into the woods to find her. They had tracked down the young man's abandoned car deep in the forest, and the only nearby refuge was Melanie's villa. Meanwhile, Dan was sleeping in the snow when he was startled awake by the sound of heavy footsteps. He spotted fresh tire tracks in the snow leading directly toward Melanie's home and quickly sprinted after them. From a distance, he saw the villa surrounded and occupied by armed men. Inside, the leader accused Melanie of hiding something about his missing daughter, waving an item that belonged to her. At that moment, Dan silently made his way inside and found Jim hiding in the kitchen. After assessing the number of enemies, he readied his weapons. He then began eliminating the gang one by one, silently cutting them down in every corner of the house. But when he stepped into the main hall, several guns were already aimed squarely at him. Suddenly, Dan dragged his blade across his own throat, but this was no suicide attempt. Within seconds, he shifted fully into his frenzy mode and slaughtered the remaining gang one after another. Melanie had no choice but to grab her children and escape into the night. Dan's deafening roars carried across the woods, drawing hordes of zombies to the villa. The next morning, when Dan opened his eyes, he was surrounded by blood and corpses. He returned to the villa and found a letter from Melanie on a table. She wrote that she and her children had left in a car heading north. "If fate allows, we may meet again someday." Nearby, the leader's missing daughter had already transformed into a zombie and was feasting on human flesh. Before leaving, Dan went into the secret room one last time, picked up Jim's sister's favorite toy, and smiled faintly. He then turned north, determined to continue his journey.